I used to work at McDonald's in the middle of nowhere just outside of Port Richmond, Virginia. I know what you're thinking. Spooky, right? But a few months ago, something terrible happened to one of the staff that for some reason justified erasing the place off of the map. Not to say I was sad to see the place go. Now, the thing about fast food is that it attracts two kinds of workers. Poor but intelligent people who are working towards a bigger picture, and total losers who have given up all hope. I belong to the latter group, but Grace, man, she was the queen of the former. When we both started working together about 8 months ago, I knew straight away that this girl was so far out of my league. She was so cool and down to earth and gorgeous. She had this way of just accepting people and finding a way to admire them, no matter the person. It didn't matter that she was beautiful, educated, and better than me in every way. When you are the standard suburban mom set their kids not to be, you don't come across that kind of acceptance every day, you know? After months of working together, yeah, we got pretty close. Not what you're thinking. So it must have been around mid-June, and we had both been working the drive-thru together for a couple of weeks. When you spend a large portion of your life serving ungrateful people from a tiny window, you get real familiar with the view. From my little box, you could see the grassy hill that separated the drive-thru from the road. Said road and beyond was a Walmart parking lot. I spent so much time staring out of that window, I even started to recognize the cars that drove by. But after my first few weeks, there was one in particular that I started to look out for. I thought it must have been the ex-con jitters or growing up where I did, but I started to get a real bad feeling about this truck as days went by. It was an old Ford truck, one of the 87 F-150 models. Once upon a time, it would have been a real beaut, all bright reds with a white stripe down the middle. Now, the red body of the truck was rusted beyond recognition, and the white stripe was a sickly yellow, almost like rotting teeth. The windows of the truck were the only things that survived the past 20 years unscathed, as they clearly weren't stock. The whole truck was so heavily tinted I couldn't understand how the thing was still on the road. The police are real eager around here. Or maybe that's just been my experience. Anyway, the first time I saw the truck, it was parked in the lot across the road opposite to me. Nothing unusual about that. Other than the creepy child abduction look, it was just another car in the lot. Or so I thought. The next day from my booth overlooking the drive-thru, I saw the car again. And again. And again. I saw it maybe 30 or 40 times that day. I think it was just driving in circles for some reason. Suffice to say, at this point, I was starting to get really suspicious of this truck. It was looking quiet that night, but the manager was always on my case if I ever left my post. So I gave Grace a quick text and asked her to watch the window while I used the bathroom. When I came back, I asked her about the truck, and she got real quiet. Said that a few minutes after I left, she saw the truck come down the road and then slam on the brakes for no apparent reason. She said it stayed there just doing nothing in an empty road. That it felt like whoever was in there was staring at her. I guess it freaked her out when I told her that I had seen it around as well, because she went back to work, then went home before her shift had finished. It was the first time I had seen her anything less than offensively happy. The next day, Grace didn't show up, so I covered her drive-thru shift. There was a big line that evening, so instead of looking out for the truck, I was really focused on working through the white trash piling up along the drive-thru. So focused, in fact, that I didn't even notice the truck when it came to the window. No one had taken any orders from the driver, so as far as I could tell, it had just driven up out of nowhere. The truck stopped at my window, and when I finally noticed, I couldn't even breathe. My eyes were locked on the tar-black window, straining for a sight of the driver, but I couldn't see anything. I just got this feeling like I'm staring down the barrel of crude oil, and there was something in there staring back at me. I didn't know what else to do, so I was just having a staring contest with this window. Then, as suddenly as it appeared, the truck raced off, tires screeching as it plowed over the grass across the wrong lane and raced off into the night. I tried to tell the manager, but of course he just told me to get a grip and deal with my stuff. What a dick. The next day, Grace came back to work and she seemed back to her old self. I was still kind of shaken up from last night, and when I told her what had happened, we were both pretty spooked. After a quick smoke break, we both agreed that it was just probably some creep playing a joke on us, but we'd both keep an eye just in case. I saw it only briefly that night. It was driving real slow down the road beyond the hill. Its lights were off, so I could only see the truck by the lights of the car behind. Behind it, the traffic was building up and you could hear horns blaring, followed by curses that were cut short as people got close enough to see the windows. Before long, the truck raced off again, apparently done for the evening. When time came for my regular bathroom break, Grace was happy enough to take my spot at the window again. That was the last time I saw her. I must have been gone 2 minutes at the most, but by the time I had returned to the window, Grace was gone, and the sound of screeching tires pierced the night. I ran into the back and called the police, told the manager what I had thought happened, and pushed my way into the office to look at the security tapes. The manager was busy hollering regulations beyond the door, but I didn't really care. As I turned on the computer and set up the tape, I saw what had happened. The cameras had picked up everything. On the screen, it played out like a bad horror movie. The truck had rolled up out of nowhere as soon as I had gone. And with the lights off, Grace had seen it too late. She tried her best to get out of the way. But before she could, something came bursting out from inside the truck. 2 long, thin, black arms that seemed more like dead branches than limbs thrust from the darkness where the driver's window should be, and they wrapped themselves around Grace's mouth and torso. To reach that far, they must have been around 6 feet long at least. It was over in about 2 seconds. Grace was pulled headfirst from the drive-thru window, and that was that. The police closed the restaurant after they took my statement. All of us, management included, got let go so fast they actually had to pay us unemployment. We've been looking for her ever since. It's been 6 months now, and it turns out Grace's family are incredibly awesome people. One of her uncles has even taken me on as an apprentice mechanic. It turned out that one of my friend's dads was a police officer who was in fact working the case. The guy absolutely hates me, but my friend finally managed to get some information out of him. Today, after we met up and spoke about it, I'm convinced that whatever happened in that booth was even more sinister than I could ever imagine. The police haven't turned up anything. Turns out the plate number I gave them for the truck actually belongs to a car on the other side of the country. They never even managed to see the damn thing on any other cameras around the area, and they've checked them all. It's like the truck picked her up, blasted out of the drive-thru, and vanished into the night. Well, there was one tape they didn't get to look at more than briefly. According to my friend, his dad told him his whole department is up in arms because of a couple of suits that came in and confiscated the original tape maybe 2 days after the kidnapping. Told the whole police force to drop the case and just leave it to the feds. No one believes me. Not even Grace's family. Even the cops that saw the tape are keeping it real quiet for some reason. But I'm not crazy. I saw that window, and I know that whatever took Grace from the booth that day wasn't anything natural. These days, I'm always looking at the road. And even when I'm working in the garage, I keep an eye out on the horizon, waiting for the truck with the tar black windows. You're all probably thinking the same exact thing I was. How could someone accept a friend request from themselves on Facebook? Well, a few weeks ago, everything in my life was as normal could be. I was living alone in my one-bedroom apartment. I worked at a decent paying job, even though the hours sucked, and on my off days, I spent them hanging out with friends. As many of you out there listening to this right now, I also like to spend the majority of my time on social media. Heck, some of you probably have Facebook open right now. I would often be on social media right up until I fell asleep. Then, immediately upon waking, I'd grab my phone and once again start browsing pages. It's a strange phenomenon. Social media. Why do I give a crap about Mrs. Davidson's new recipe? Or who Nathan is currently dating? What is so alluring about Erica's trip to the park that afternoon? I'm not sure, but I know one thing. I have to see it. All of it. I have this overwhelming need to see everything the sites have to offer. Getting the tiniest glimpses into other people's lives for the briefest of seconds before ultimately forgetting them forever is like a drug to me. I've met people over the years that vehemently disregard all forms of social media. They would even mock or belittle others who seemed glued to their phones. Facebook is just a money-hungry corporation that thrives on stealing personal information from all of their users. They would say time and time again. Yet, on more than one occasion, I'd catch them scrolling through their phones, checking status updates and the like. I can't blame them, however. In a digital society where everything is connected, it's truly difficult to live off the grid. Pretty much the only way nowadays is to renounce technology altogether and just live in the woods like a hermit. But for the rest of society, we all mindlessly drone along, liking photos, commenting our opinions, and subscribing to more and more outlets of information. One day, out of the blue, I received a new notification after leaving work. Such a glorious feeling it is to receive a notification. The fact that someone took the time out of their day to interact with you is amazing. At least to me it is. I quickly retrieved my phone from my pocket to check the notification. When I saw it, confusion and mild annoyance struck me at the same time. Thomas Parker has sent you a friend request. I stared at the message for a while thinking that I may have misread it. But no, I was reading it correctly. I decided to wait to inspect it a bit further once I got home from work. The entire drive home, I was trying to think of how it happened. While it's entirely possible that another Thomas Parker had found me and jumped at the chance to befriend someone with the same name, the odds of that happening were quite slim. I then began to think it was one of my friends, creating a duplicate profile just to have a laugh at my expense. That rationalization seemed a bit more plausible in my mind. When I arrived home, I booted up my computer and grabbed myself a snack, ready for yet another night of internet binging. With a click of a button, a slew of web pages flooded my screen. Twitter, Instagram, YouTube, Yahoo, and of course, Facebook. But only one of those pages had a flashing notification on them. With a sigh, I opened Facebook. Oh my God. Christina got a new cat. Yawn. I moved my cursor over my new friend request and clicked it. Just like I thought, I hadn't misread my phone. There, sitting in a tiny little box, was a request from Thomas Parker. He even had the same profile picture as I had. I clicked on the profile, and with no surprise, his page was completely private. I thought about clicking on Deny Request for a moment, before the thought crept in that I could just unfriend him and block him if it is in fact a prank. So, I clicked Accept. The moment I clicked it, a message box popped up. Hello, Thomas, it said. To say that it caught me off guard would be an understatement. I was not expecting a message from this imposter so quickly. I didn't respond right away. Instead, I went back to look at his page. What I saw made my hands freeze above my keyboard. The entire page was exactly like mine. For the past 2 years, every post I had ever made, this page made the same exact post within minutes of my own. Every status, every photo copied to theirs. What confused me was that my page is 100% private. So how could he have gotten access to all my posts like that? I tried to brush off the weird posts and went back to the messenger. "Hello, Thomas," I replied with a smirk. I knew at that moment it had to be a prank from one of my friends. They simply would stalk my Facebook with their normal page, then copy the post onto the fake page. But to do that for 2 years straight seemed like a bit much. His next message made me somewhat nervous though. "I see you." My head snapped back to the window behind me in a single motion. Then I thought about how I was on the 4th floor and my blinds were drawn. I turned my attention back to my monitor. "Jake, is this you?" I asked, but I didn't receive any response from the page for the rest of the night. The whole interaction had me confused and, I'll admit, a little unnerved, but I quickly put it out of my mind. The next morning, I awoke to find a new notification on Facebook. A new message. "I can still see you." That message fully woke me up as I stared at it with wide eyes. My gaze drifted from my phone to my window. My heart thudded in my chest as I saw that my window blinds were now open from the previous night. I looked back at the message and noticed one other thing that was odd to me. The message was sent at 6:50 a.m. The current time was 6:55 a.m. Somehow, this person had sent a message to me right before I woke up. I sent a reply. "Ha ha, real funny, man. You must be super bored." Just as soon as I sent the message, a new one came in. "Your coffee's ready." Just then, the auto timer on my coffee maker I set the previous night for 7 a.m. sounded throughout my dark apartment. In a wave of panicked rage, I sent back another message. "Listen, I don't know who this is, but if you keep messing with me, you'll regret it." I didn't receive another response after that. Feeling victorious, I got ready for the day and went to work. For the next few days, I didn't receive so much as a single notification from the imposter. Feeling like I had finally won the battle, I settled back into my routine. I was leaving work 2 days ago when I received a new message. To be honest, I really didn't want to open it, but my hand seemed to move on its own. This time, the imposter sent a photo. Upon seeing it, I felt my stomach sink. It was a picture of the inside of my bedroom. I had never taken a picture of my bedroom in my life, so there was no way someone could have that picture without being in there at that very moment. I called the police and informed them that someone had broken into my apartment. They told me they would send a car right away. When I arrived home, the police were already on the scene and asked me how I knew someone had broken in. I explained that someone had been pranking me for a couple of weeks now, but they just sent me a picture from inside my place. We entered my apartment together and searched everywhere but found nothing. The police asked me if anything was out of place and I told them nothing was amiss. After the officer took a statement and left, I opened up Facebook once again. I was shocked to find that all the messages between myself and the imposter were gone. I spent over an hour searching for the profile, but I came up empty-handed. The relief that washed over me was like a warm shower. That was quickly halted when I noticed a piece of paper sticking out from underneath my monitor. After taking it out and reading it, that uneasy feeling I felt from his messages quickly came back. The paper was blank, aside from 3 words. "See you soon." Ever since that day, I haven't spent more than 20 minutes on social media. I don't send messages anymore, and I definitely don't accept friend requests from anyone. That fear of being watched still hangs over me. Yesterday, I received a call from a good friend of mine. He sounded annoyed and upset. He asked if I had created a fake Facebook profile to mess with him. I told him it was a scam trying to steal his information. I told him to block and report it. I probably should have told him the truth, but I didn't want him to go through the same thing I went through. I don't know who was impersonating me or how, but I'll leave you with a little bit of advice. Do not accept a friend request from yourself on Facebook. If you do, you might not be as lucky as I am. I'm not saddened by the recent passing of my grandfather. Rather, I'm compelled to share the way I knew him best. I would not be here today if not for him. The entity came for me when I was 8 years old, and there was no way I would have survived if anyone else had been driving. My grandfather and I were on a fishing trip that day. My dad had intended to join us, but something came up, so it was just the two of us for the first time. I was a little awkward around my grandfather because I never actually been alone with him before. I had always watched others interact with him, but had little to say myself because, after all, I was only 8. I was also in awe of how he was to my dad the way my dad was to me, namely, a voice of authority. When my grandfather told me about the different types of fish and what baits to use, I listened like it was the most important thing in the world. It turned out to be a good thing that I took his words so seriously. That acceptance would later save my life. It began very innocuously, as we walked through a small gorge to get back to the car from the prime fishing spot. I could hear my grandfather's voice echo from the high rock walls. While he packed things into the car, I had several minutes to wander around, and I used them to run back to that area and shout. Strangely, my yell echoed only feebly once, and then not at all. Scream as I might, I heard no reflection of the noise. I was too young at the time to really understand how impossible that was. I just assumed I was yelling wrong somehow, or that my grandfather had a special grown-up timbre that allowed his voice to echo, while mine just dropped off. Still, it bothered me, and I eventually brought it up on the drive back. Everything about that moment became seared into my memory. It was 3:22 in the afternoon, according to the clock in the car's dashboard. The sky was mostly clear with traces of white, and my grandfather's eyes were wide orbs of alarm, turned upon me, while his white knuckles tightened around the wheel. "What did you say, boy?" I asked how I can echo like you. I told him, suddenly afraid that I had done something wrong. I yelled and I couldn't echo. His face was normally crisscrossed with little lines that ran their way along relaxed, droopy skin. At that very moment, his forehead and cheeks tightened to smoothness, and he scanned left to right rapidly. He didn't seem to find what he was looking for through the windows, but he did not seem reassured. "Here." He leaned over and opened the glove box in front of me, and pulled out a bag of jelly beans. I smiled for a moment, but he was not giving them to me as a gift the way he had intended. "Go on, eat 'em." I held the bag in my hands. It seemed a massive feast. If I had been left alone to my own devices, I might have eaten them all eventually, but not all at once. Why? "I said eat 'em," he said gruffly, his tone brooking no argument. I began stuffing the jelly beans into my mouth. He looked down and around, then at the back seat, and then at his travel thermos and the cup holder between us. He thrust it into my hands to join the spilling bag of jelly beans. "Drink this. All of it." "I'm not allowed to have coffee," I told him. "Mom," he cut me off. "Your mother will understand. Drink it. I know it tastes bad, but down it all." His gaze then refocused on something beyond me, and I turned my head to my window to see the forested hills rolling by at various apparent speeds based on their distance. The furthest hills out on the horizon hardly seemed to be moving at all, but I thought I saw a tiny little speck atop one. My grandfather gripped my shoulder with one hand. "Drink, boy, drink! And eat those jelly beans too. You need the sugar and caffeine. It's going to try to make you fall asleep. Don't let it." To say I was scared then would be an understatement. No part of me thought this was a prank of some sort. He was too reserved a man for that. And the coffee tasted terrible, but I gulped it down until none was left. After that, I began swallowing jelly beans whole until they were all gone. I looked to my right. The speck in the distance was still out there, but now one range of hills closer. It was still tiny, but now held movement, akin to something waving back and forth. I looked to my grandfather in askance. He in turn looked away from the thing in the distance to focus on my face. He breathed in through his nose and then turned forward, determined in a way I had never seen him. His leg moved, and the car began to accelerate. We had already been going the speed limit on the empty highway. The sugar, caffeine, and fear began to have an effect on me. I remember my cheeks and forehead warming and my hands growing clammy. I asked my grandfather, "What's going on? I'm scared." "Be scared," he breathed. His eyes on the road as he continued to hit the gas. I could see the needle passing 80. "That'll keep you awake. This thing, this godforsaken thing, it came after your grandmother, and it started the same way. Just before a long drive, we noticed her voice stopped echoing." His face contorted into a furious mask. "But cars are a lot better now than they were back then. I won't let it get you." My back began forcefully pressing into my seat as he put the gas to the floor. I watched the needle pass 90, and then I looked out the window again. It was even closer, now visible as the silhouette of a man running up hills, between trees, and over boulders parallel to us. "It's still out there." My grandfather grunted angrily and audibly slammed his foot down. I held onto my armrest and the door handle in terror as our car topped 100 miles an hour and began to shake. It felt like we were in a barely controlled projectile far beyond any limit of safety, and I was terrified that the highway would suddenly stop being empty, and we would smash into a car or truck ahead. But even through that overwhelming fear and adrenaline, a chilled tiredness began to seep up my spine. My eyes began to feel heavy, and I blearily looked out to my right. The shock woke me back up. It was on the gravel shoulder of the highway now, completely visible as a black humanoid silhouette running at incredible speed alongside our car. In that moving pitch darkness, I could see lit pinpoints that made it feel as if I was gazing into the night sky itself. The afternoon sun burned in the sky above and behind it with no effect, staring as its blurred feet began to pelt across the painted line at the edge of the road. I felt sleepy again. It was running next to us, but drawing ever closer. "Wake up!" my grandfather screamed, risking one hand off the wheel at 110 miles an hour to shake my shoulder. "It's trying to drain the life out of you. Wake up!" He jerked the car one lane to the left and still pressed into my seat by the acceleration. I stared down at the hypnotic dashes in the middle of the road. Bit by bit, black feet began landing between each dash, keeping pace with us. I remember the car shaking violently around me, the way I imagined a space shuttle lifting off might shake around its astronauts. I know now we were crossing 120 and nearing the most the car could offer. But at the time, I was caught in watching the hypnotic dashes and stars in those void legs rapidly moving back and forth as it ran right up alongside the car and reached down with one hand to open the door. Wind blasted around me as the gale force of 120-mile-an-hour winds tore at my clothing and hair. Waking up halfway, I screamed, and my grandfather jerked the car to the left again as much as he could without going off the road. It didn't matter. The running silhouette held open the door against the wind with its star-filled arm and began preparing to leap into the car with us. The other arm gripped my neck, and the coldness that it brought cannot be described with mere words. The closest I can come to say is that the vast speeds and forces of an antithesis cosmos hated me. Somewhere, ice and anti-life were the rule, moving through emptiness at absurd velocities. And this thing was some small part of that undead will. But it was not fully here. It could only interact with us in certain windows. That's what I believe now. My grandfather gave the only shout of fear I would ever hear from him as the car seemed to shake apart around us. I turned left and looked at the speedometer, finding the needle to be unreadably far into the red, and felt the heavy blanket of sleep fall over me as the silhouette grasped at me repeatedly, but failed to reach me. Suddenly, the door slammed shut, cutting off the wind. Inch by inch, we began pulling away. It ran furiously alongside, but the entity was just a tiny bit too slow between one moment and the next. Realizing it couldn't get to us, it vanished. We had escaped it. I awoke in a hospital several days later. My grandfather told nobody the real story, of course, but the doctors had plenty of diversion. Somehow, I had been drained of a number of vital electrolytes, salts, and so on, and they chalked my mild coma up to some sort of severe dietary imbalance. But I knew the truth. And I've made sure to tell people I care about the small piece of advice my grandfather taught me. I don't care if it makes sense to you. Please just listen. It's still out there. Still in the open lands of the Midwest. And it's probably always been there. It was just never a problem before we started bringing great speeds into our daily lives. People die every day by falling asleep at the wheel. And I know for certain that not all of those incidents are innocent. So if your voice stops echoing, cancel your road trip. It's waiting for you. I've been working at the local Chuck E. Cheese's for a little over a year now. To sum up a Chuck E. Cheese, it's pretty much a building filled with various games and activities for children to enjoy. Arcade machines, ball pits, even colorful tunnels that children can play and crawl around in. It's basically a nightmare for people like me. I'm not too fond of children, to be perfectly honest. They're kinda cute from a distance, but once the screaming starts, I usually want to bash my own skull in. Why would you work at a Chuck E. Cheese's if you hate children, you ask? Well, a few reasons, actually. One, it was one of the few places in town that was currently hiring at the time. Two, the pay was actually decent. And three, I got to work the night shift. I was a nighttime janitor. I would show up around the end of the day and instantly be greeted by the numerous shrieks of children. I would go to my spot in the back room and wait for the building to close before starting my work, unless something immediately required my attention, like a kid vomiting up 100 pepperonis in the ball pit. That's pretty much the low end of the job. Throughout the night, my tasks include sweeping, vacuuming, mopping, clearing off tables, stocking napkin containers, and the like. If the children that day weren't terrible little imps, I could get my work done in about 2 hours. One time, a kid actually climbed onto a Chuck E. Cheese robot and tried to feed him pizza. An entire pizza. That took me a lot longer to clean. Why parents never watch their kids is beyond me. The easy nights are the ones that make the job worth it, though. because after I'm done, I could just kick back in the office and watch TV until my shift is over. Well, a few weeks ago, I had just finished my duties for the evening when I heard a strange noise. It sounded like a muffled thud coming from somewhere in the building. At first, I thought it was something in the back room that had fallen over, but when I checked the area, nothing was amiss. The noise only happened once, so I thought nothing of it. A few days passed by, and this night I was cleaning pizza sauce off the ceiling. That's right, the ceiling. When I heard that sound again, it sounded exactly the same as the previous night, but this time it was much louder. I searched all over the darkened building, checked the arcade games, the stage, the dining area, but I couldn't find anything. I was starting to grow concerned about the noise, because if something did fall or break and I didn't take care of it, my boss would be pissed. Still coming up empty-handed, I finished my shift and went home. The following night, I didn't do any of my tasks at first. I simply set up a chair in the dining area and waited. I'll admit, sitting by myself in a Chuck E. Cheese's at night is pretty unsettling. Now, I'm not sitting in the pitch blackness, mind you, that would just be silly. Depending on the area I'm cleaning, I set the lights to dim, then turn them off when I'm finished. I would love to keep the lights on all night, but I did that once and got yelled at for it. The boss said something about electricity costs, which seemed odd to me, but I didn't question any further. You might be asking, how would he know? Security cameras. And since they are dated and since I'm not very good at editing security footage, I just dealt with it. Anyways, I'm sitting in the dining area, and after about an hour of hearing nothing, I decided it was time to actually start working. Walking to the utility closet is when I heard the sound. This time it rooted me in mid-step. I knew exactly where it was coming from. The noise sounded from below my feet. This was strange because I never knew this building had a basement. My curiosity was piqued at that point, so I spent the remainder of the night looking for the entrance to the basement. After looking through all the doors, I began to think that the building might just have a simple crawl space and some critter had gotten stuck under there. Just as that thought crossed my mind, I passed by the skee ball and coin pusher game. In between the two games, I saw it. A slight discoloration of the carpet. A faint square outline in one of the floor panels. I was actually shocked that in all my time working there, I never once noticed it. I had vacuumed that area multiple times. As I made my way over to it, I once again thought about the fact that my boss never mentioned it to me. Me, the janitor, someone who should know the area so I can clean it. Upon reaching the outline in the carpet, I retrieved my trusty pocket knife and gently lifted the hatch in the floor. When the hatch opened, I was immediately hit with a wave of stale air. Have you ever walked into a building that had very poor ventilation? Or like an attic? It was like that. It wasn't necessarily a bad smell, but enough to warrant a moment of acclamation. Inside the hatch was a small wooden ladder that descended into the darkness. I pulled out my small LED flashlight I keep on my keychain and looked inside. The ladder went down for a few feet, and the walls were made of coarse concrete. I was beginning to feel uneasy as I looked aimlessly into the dark of the hatch. Then I heard it once more. A soft thud, but this time it echoed off the concrete walls. I was positive at that point that I had located the source of the noise. I climbed down the rickety wooden ladder, and the farther down I got, the more the odor of the room began to change. The staleness of the air started to take on a more metallic characteristic. Upon reaching the bottom, I found myself in a narrow corridor that went on for only a few feet. Making my way towards the end of the hall, I saw that it opened into a large square room. Upon stepping into the room, the scent once again changed and started to take on a foul, sour odor. What I saw in the room gave me chills. The walls had various symbols painted on them in a deep crimson. In the middle of the floor, there was what seemed to be a ritualistic circle of some sort, painted on the floor. Just then, movement caught my eye. I shined my flashlight towards the back corner of the room, and that's when I saw it. Eyes glinting in the darkness from my flashlight. But these eyes weren't alive. They were glossy and vacant. They resided in the skull of a young boy whose body was completely eviscerated. But that's not what terrified me. It was the creature feasting on his legs that caused my body to seize. I was unable to see what it looked like as it had its back to me, but it was hunched over, and its back looked reddish, like exposed muscle. Then, I heard the thud once again as the creature dropped the boy's leg onto the floor. The thud echoed throughout this room. Hearing this sound snapped me out of my trance, and I realized I needed to get the hell out of there and call the police. I ran back through the corridor as fast as I could, and just as I reached the base of the ladder, the hatch above me slammed shut. Panicked, I climbed up the ladder and attempted to force the hatch open. Then I heard a new noise coming from behind me. It sounded like shuffling. I was too terrified to aim my flashlight down the dark corridor to see what was making the sound. Instead, I frantically began punching the hatch. On my third punch, the hatch flew open and I managed to scramble my way out. Just before I made it out, however, I could have sworn I heard something whisper. Immediately, I kicked the hatch shut, ran outside, and called the police. About a half an hour later, they showed up along with my manager, and I explained the whole ordeal to them. They were, of course, completely skeptical of everything I told them. I took them inside and showed them the hatch. But when the police investigated it, all they found was a small storage room with miscellaneous boxes and items strewn about it. The police told me I should get some more sleep before coming into work. My manager scolded me after the police left and even threatened me with a drug test. I started to actually believe my mind fabricated the whole event. Until yesterday, when I was browsing the internet and came across a news article. It was about a boy who had gone missing about a few weeks ago, the day after his 10th birthday. As I stared at the photo in the article, I felt my throat tighten. It was the same little boy I saw in that room being devoured. I have a pretty good idea where that kid had his birthday party at. I'm not sure if what I saw was real or not, or if I'm actually insane. But regardless, I don't think I'm going to keep this job much longer. So kids, be careful if you ever go to a Chuck E. Cheese's. And parents, always keep an eye on your children. You never know who or what could be watching them too. I used to work as an overnight stalker for Walmart. For those of you who are unaware of what a Walmart is, it's pretty much an oversized convenience store, selling anything from clothing to food to electronics. If you are in need of something, chances are Walmart has it. As many of you are aware of what a stalker is, I suppose I should still explain what it is I did. Basically, whenever you walk into a store and you find yourself mindlessly glancing over all the various items on the shelves, somebody had to put them there. And that somebody was me. It's pretty much cut and dry as far as tasks go. Either you're taking inventory or unloading products from the back. However, for the most part, it's the movement of items from the back housing area to the shelves. For a lot of the youths in the US, working at Walmart is generally a first job location for those who don't wish to dive into the chaos that is fast food service. As for myself, I ended up with the job after recently getting laid off. The job market was rough at the time, and me needing an immediate source of income, I found a few other options. The job itself was fairly simple, and the supervisors were quite lenient on some of the regulations. For example, during my shift, I would be allowed to listen to music on my iPod while I worked. I'd be allowed some moderate breaks. To be honest, as long as my section got finished and I wasn't late or belligerent, I was pretty much left alone to do my job. I spent the first few weeks acclimating to my new schedule and surroundings. A lot of time was spent learning the ropes, so to speak. Meeting other coworkers, learning what is expected of me, the ins and outs of taking inventory, as well as proper stocking etiquette. Yes, I said stocking etiquette. Such as don't block the aisles, refrain from leaving boxes strewn about. If a customer is attempting to get an item you are blocking, to move your cart out of the way completely. Apart from learning the job, I found the toughest transition to be the hours. Working the night shift can be somewhat daunting. Having to wake up when the sun is setting and coming home when the sun is rising takes some getting used to. Now, it's no secret that certain individuals frequently shop at Walmart. Even though customers come in all shapes and sizes, you do get some strange customers from time to time. From people dressed up in outrageous costumes to customers not dressed up in, well, anything. Hell, in my first week, a rather large gentleman walked up to me wearing nothing but those old school gym shorts. You know, the ones that are far too short for anyone to be wearing legally. He then demanded I tell him where the office supply department is. Why he's seeking the office supply department at 2 o'clock in the morning wearing gym shorts is beyond me. But that's not what this story's about. One night, after settling into my routine, I decided to take a much-needed break. Normally, there is a specific area for employees to take breaks, but me being a smoker, I usually took my breaks out back where the shipment trucks and dumpsters are. It's not the greatest of places, but it's quiet and beggars can't be choosers, am I right? I was standing out there, enjoying the peace and quiet, watching the light from the single street lamp bounce off the green sludge the dumpsters were leaking, when I saw movement out of the corner of my eye. From where I was standing, there were 2 semi-trucks side by side. I thought I saw someone or something duck between the 2 when I glanced over. Now, I know this goes against every horror movie ever made in the history of anything, but I called out to it. Hello? And just like in the movies, nothing responded. My mind first thought about a homeless junkie who was sleeping out back, but didn't want to have the police called on him for loitering. Then my imagination began to shift to a knife-wielding psychopath waiting for me to walk around that corner and slit my throat. Once that thought popped into my head, I quickly noped the hell out and went back inside. I went back to work and put the whole experience out of my mind. I put it out so far that I found myself going back outside again for my second break. It was around 4 a.m. and I was heading into the home stretch of my shift. As my hand rested upon the door is when that earlier experience came rushing back to me. After negotiating with myself that my need of nicotine was greater than my need to live, I pushed the door open and stepped outside. After walking outside, I instantly noticed something was wrong. The lone street lamp from before was off. Now, I had taken my breaks later in my shifts before when the sun was beginning to rise and the light outside would be turned off. But it was still pitch black outside. What I should have done was turn right back around and go back inside. But in a moment of tired confusion, I accidentally let the door behind me click shut. It was one of those external doors that are always locked from the outside to prevent thefts. Normally, I would just prop it open, but in my stupor, I forgot. Hearing that click, I felt my heart begin to beat faster. I tried to calm myself, rationalizing that it was only a 2-minute walk around the building to the front. So I stood there, in the dark, the only light emanating from the ember of my cigarette. Then I heard something that made the blood drain from my face. Footsteps, coming from the direction of the trucks. Slowly, I turned to look over in that direction. This time, I didn't say anything. I just stared. I found my eyes trying desperately to adjust to the darkness. After a moment, I could just make out the outline of the nearby truck. I attempted to comfort myself again by thinking it was just the homeless guy. Apart from the smoking, I'm actually in pretty decent shape, so unless the guy was a sumo wrestler, I figured I could handle myself in a fight. That's when I saw it. There was a part of the truck that was much darker than the rest of the metal. The dark spot stretched from the ground to near the top of the trailer. The shadow was in the shape of a man. There was a person standing next to the truck, and they were facing me. My fight or flight instinct took over, and I found myself doing something I never thought I would do in that situation. I shouted at whoever it was. "You got a problem, pal?" I said, trying to sound tough. I'm not sure what unnerved me more, the fact that it didn't respond or the fact that it remained motionless. For a brief moment, I thought the shadow that I was talking to was just some dark paint on the side of the truck. Then it moved. I watched it take a slow step towards me, and in that instant I almost screamed. The sudden movement made me jump back and thud against the door. I felt my throat constrict and my mind went blank. People always describe scary encounters as being frozen with fear. It wasn't that I couldn't move. It was just I couldn't remember how. I know it may sound strange, but I genuinely couldn't remember the most basic of functions, such as blinking. Watching this giant person grow closer to me made me feel like I was shrinking. I felt my eyes begin to water in response to not blinking. When my eyes finally couldn't take it anymore, they shut. In that nanosecond, my eyes were closed. This thing had closed the distance to me and was now about 3 feet away. I could see it much more clearly now. Its body was tall, but incredibly thin, like this creature hadn't eaten in years. Its appendages were equally as long as its torso. The skin on its body was like charred meat, almost like it was covered in ash. I didn't want to look up at its face, but my eyes drifted up without my consent. Its eyes were paler than my skin at that point. Seeing them up close, they almost glowed against the darkness. Its mouth was jagged and dripping some type of oozing liquid. What scared me the most was how utterly quiet it was, like it was some sort of hunter stalking its prey. Even at this distance, if I wasn't already aware of its presence, I probably wouldn't have seen it. Suddenly, it raised its bony arm towards me. The arm was almost long enough to reach me from where it stood. Whether it was instincts or watching too many martial arts movies, my brain suddenly came back online. I swatted its arm away and took off as fast as I could to get around the building. The entire time I sprinted around the building, I felt as if its fingers were grasping at the back of my neck. My lungs started to burn. I wanted to throw up. And if that thing touched me, I probably would have destroyed my pants. Rounding the corner, I crashed into a late-night customer's shopping cart, sending the contents flying. I quickly scrambled to my feet and looked behind me. I was alone. Well, alone with a very angry customer. My supervisor was, for lack of a better word, pissed. He scolded me, replaced the products for the customer, and demanded an explanation. At the risk of blaming my situation on a monster, I told him I was simply locked out and ran around to the front. That I wasn't paying attention and ran into the customer accidentally. For the most part, I was technically telling the truth. I didn't stick around at that job for much longer. I ended up finding a decent desk job uploading sales data for a local company. It's a strict job and very boring, but the pay is great and I don't have to work at night. I'm not sure if it was just my bad luck that the creature came after me, or if it simply likes to hang outside of stores when it's completely dark outside. But I'll never go to a Walmart at 4 a.m. ever again. And I would advise you all to do the same.